Okay, we're going to have a lesson today on factoring out the GCF, which is the greatest common factor. So I want to show you how to factor this because in our next lesson for trinomials, we are going to need to know how to factor out the GCF. And while at times we may look at our coefficients and be able to determine the GCF, there may be times when your brain is just not cooperating and you need a little assistance from your calculator. So I want to show you how to use your calculator to help you and assist you. But again, your calculator should not be what you depend on every time to find the GCF. So we're just going to review the distributive property really quick. We're going to multiply the monomial 4x with the binomial 2x minus 7. And so if you remember, I'm using my box method, so I have one row and two columns, and I'm going to get 8x squared. And then if I multiply negative 7 and 4x, I'm going to get the product negative 28x. Okay, so remember that factoring is simply undoing the multiplication to figure out what two polynomials would I multiply together to create the polynomial that I'm given as the answer. So we've got 18x to the third minus 24x squared. So I want to be able to factor out or divide out the greatest common factor between 18 and 24. Now some of you may be able to do this in your head. Some of you may need some assistance from your calculator. So I've provided you with the steps here, and that's simply what I'm going to follow. So step 1 says press math, right arrow, and 9. So I'm going to press math, I'm going to press the right arrow, and then I'm going to press the 9 button. And it actually shows up as GCD in your calculator. And all you're going to do is you are going to type in, now we're in step 2, you're going to type in the coefficients of each term of the polynomial. Press a comma between each coefficient, press the closed parentheses, and enter. So 18, comma is right above the 7 button. And then if your coefficient is negative, you are just going to use the positive number. You cannot type a negative in or you're going to get an error message. And so I close my parentheses and I'm going to hit enter. And the greatest common factor of 18 and 24 is 6. So I'm going to put a 6 out here. All right, so I can divide out evenly a 6 with 18 and 24, and that's the biggest number that will divide out evenly for both. Okay, if you recall, x to the third is the same as me writing x times x times x, and x squared is the same thing as me writing x times x. You can also factor out your variables. So here is how variables work, because you have to do them separately from your numbers. You cannot use your calculator for these. So you want to look at how many x's or y's, how many variables are being multiplied for each term, and you can only factor out as many x's as each term has to give. So this has 3 x's to give up. This term only has 2. So in order to pull out the biggest number from each, the most I can take from each term is 2 x's, and that's going to make x times x, which is another way to write x squared. So I can factor out or divide out an x squared from each term. So now I'm going to figure out, well, if I know this row term, I should be able to fill in this column term using my multiplication skills. So what times 6x squared is going to give me the product 18x to the third, and that should be 3x. Now I can use that same skill to fill in this column term. What times 6x squared is going to give me a negative 24x squared, and that should be a negative 4. So my factors are 6x squared and 3x minus 4. That's what I would have to multiply together to get 18x to the third minus 24x squared. And this guy right here, 6x squared, he is the GCF. He is the greatest common factor. And what I'm left with when I divide out 6x squared is 3x minus 4. All right, let's look on the back. And we are going to try this again. So now I want to factor 25 times x to the 7th. And a negative 40x to the third. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the GCF. I have to find the GCF of 25 and negative 40, so I'm going to go to my calculator. I'm going to math, right arrow, 9, and I'm going to type in my coefficients. 25, comma, and now remember we cannot type in a negative, so I'm going to type in 40, close the parentheses, and hit enter. And my GCF is 5. All right, and now I'm going to look at my x's. So x to the 7th is really like multiplying the base of x 7 times. okay? And x to the third is the same as me multiplying the base of x 3 times. So now I want to look and see how many x's does each term have to give up, and what's the most that I can take from each term. Well, this guy has 3 to give up, and this guy also has 3 to give up. He has actually 7, but because this guy doesn't have as many, I can't take 7 x's from this term. So the most I can pull is x to the third. So now I want to look at what would I multiply by 5x to the third to get 25x to the seventh, and that would be 5x to the fourth. And then what would I multiply by 5x to the third to get a negative 40x to the third, and that would be a negative 8. So my factors are 5x to the third times 5x to the fourth minus 8. But my GCF is this guy right here. He is my GCF. All right, let's look at the next one. So I want to factor x to the fourth minus 6x squared plus 3x to the fifth. I'm actually going to write this in standard form, so I'm going to write this in order of degree. So 3x to the fifth would come first, plus x to the fourth minus 6x squared. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to look at my factors. I've got 3, 1, and negative 6 that I have to look at for my coefficients. So how does the GCF work in the calculator when I have 3 coefficients? So we're going to do this. We are going to math, right arrow 9. I'm going to type in 3, 1. Your calculator will only GCF 2 coefficients at a time. So here's how it works when you have 3. You're going to do the first 2, and you're going to get the GCF of those 2 numbers. If it's a GCF, which is 1, of these 2 coefficients, it may also be a GCF of this third coefficient over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this greatest common factor of both 3 and 1, and I'm going to use that with the last coefficient. So I'm going to GCF in my calculator again, and I'm going to use the common factor for the first 2 and the last coefficient. But remember, we cannot type in a negative, so I'm going to see what is a GCF of 1 and 6, and that is a 1. So I'm going to use this last GCF in my calculator as my greatest common factor for all 3 of my terms in my trinomial. And yes, you can have a GCF of 1. You should never have a GCF of 0, because then you would, if you're multiplying anything by 0, then these would all be 0 terms. Okay, now I'm going to look at my x's. So x to the fifth means I'm really multiplying the base of x 5 times. X to the fourth power means I'm multiplying the base of x 4 times. And x to the power of 2 means I'm really multiplying my base of x twice. So I want to look how many x's does each term have to give up, and the most I can take from each that I can factor out is x times x, which is x squared. So now I'm going to use my multiplication skills to see what would I need to multiply x squared by to get 3x to the fifth. It would be 3x to the third. What would I have to multiply x squared by to get x to the fourth? That would be x squared. And what would I multiply x squared by to get negative 6x squared? Negative 6. So here are my factors. I would multiply x squared times the trinomial 3x to the third plus x squared minus 6. And again, my GCF, my greatest common factor for all the terms, is x squared.